Being on this stage is so meaningful to me for so many reasons, but for two reasons in particular. Let's see. So one is that I spent 3.5 of my early childhood years right here in Pocatello, Idaho. Oh, my mom moved us here when I was 4, so she could attend the university, or Idaho State University, which is where our TEDx is being hosted. Go Bengals. That's the mini dome in 1978, which is now your Holt Arena. We moved around a little bit over the years, and my mom eventually got her PhD at UCLA, but in this town, in kindergarten through 2nd grade, this is where it was going on, see? That's my sister and me and some random cat in our backyard. So for anyone who grew up in a rural community, especially before the invention of the internet, you know that the freedom to roam as a kid in a place like Pocatello was off the charts. I'd hop on my bike with my best friend Sonia, who's in the audience today, and we would take off into the great unknown on this wild adventure, and we would get lost for hours, sometimes geographically, but always in our imaginations. That's Sonia in the red. Isn't she adorable? So hanging out with Sonia and the neighborhood kids was the ultimate wrinkle in time experience, where we were so present in our made-up worlds that time stopped and space warped and we were gone. And we had permission to be gone, as long as we were back in time for dinner. I will cherish my 3.5 years in Pocatello, Idaho forever. Now, the second reason why being on the stage is so meaningful to me is because growing up, the idea that I could be on a stage in front of an audience, in the spotlight, by myself and share my story, was not part of any story or reality my imagination could have conjured up. That's because for years, I would have rather crawled under a rock than subject myself to this kind of risk. I mean, I'll just call it for what it is. Exposure is terrifying, okay? And, but when we put ourselves out there, it's worth it. And growing up in this town, I realized that I needed to do that. Exposure is terrifying. And in fact, I'm feeling it right now. I am terrified, and it's because we're afraid of being exposed. So let me go back to my mom and dad. So my mom is also here in the audience, Dr. Davis, and she and my father, I just want to give them props because growing up, I was a child of the 70s, and they were barely 20 when they had my sister, and 22 when they had me. And my dad had just returned from Vietnam, and no one knew what PTSD was, and alcoholism was a disease in our family. Now, when I was 2, my parents divorced, and my mom was suddenly a single parent with only a high school diploma and no other means but to feed these 2 hungry mouths and minds. And so, like some of you from single-parent households, my sister and I were sometimes left to our own devices from a very young age. And by devices, I don't mean iPads or iPhones or PS5s. We were latchkey kids, right? We didn't even have cable television. We had bikes with banana seats and streamers on the handlebars. And we would walk or ride to and from school in the rain and the snow, uphill both ways. And we would let ourselves in when we came home from school, and we would get our own snacks. And that was just the way it was, and it wasn't bad at all. Before we moved to Pocatello, I did have a bad experience in a doctor's office. Now, being left to my own devices, I somehow managed to put a Barbie doll dress all the way up my nose into my nasal passage. Yeah, you heard that right. I don't know how I did it, super power, but I managed to put this inside here. Now, my mom only started to figure out that something was going on, or should I say catch whiff of it, when my singular nonstop runny nostril started to emanate just a hint of like eau de roadkill. So the doctor confirmed there was some obstruction, but to get it out, he was gonna have to stick this arm-length needle-like tool like this. You all can see that. But you know, actually in my memory, I think it was more like this. Up my nose, and I was having none of it, right? I became a 3-year-old Incredible Hulk. After I threw the doctor across the room, and I tossed a nurse out the door and another one out the window. They did the next logical thing, I guess, that a doctor from 1975 would do. They put me in a straitjacket. And yes, and then they dug that dress out. No, okay, the dress needed to come out, right? I mean, there's no argument there, and I can laugh about this now, you know, and make light of it, but the truth is, trauma leaves an imprint. And we never know what other people are carrying around with them and coping with. The trauma from that event changed my life. I went from a relatively carefree, well-adjusted, post-divorce 3-year-old to very afraid. In my mind, in that moment, I became a target. And the coping mechanism that kicked in for me was to run and hide and avoid and never get trapped again. And even though I could play and get lost in my imagination, I was the kid looking back over her shoulder. Now, many of you and us have had these experiences in our lives where we thought maybe we were going to die. I know I definitely did that day in the doctor's office, but I would argue that all of us have had at least one moment in our lives where we felt like we wanted to die from shame or humiliation or rejection or regret or guilt or grief, or from something that we thought was a massive failure on our part that left us feeling vulnerable and exposed. And when these moments happen, we draw conclusions. That's what our big, beautiful brains are designed to do, to conclude. So we come up with these ideas, and it's not always the straitjacket moments that do it. Sometimes it's a friend turning their back on you, or an ongoing comparison between you and a sibling, or your dad's side of the family telling you you have thunder thighs or wimpy biceps every time they see you. When we're young, it's really hard, well, let's be honest, even when we're older, it's really hard not to take things personally. And so we end up with these stories about ourselves that we're not safe, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, strong enough, feminine enough, masculine enough, not enough. And then we go on and we start looking for proof, okay? And we find it everywhere. We find it in the kid in 2nd grade who teased us relentlessly because he had a crush on us, oops. And our best friend in 5th grade who told the whole class we stuffed our bra. And the gang of girls in junior high who tormented us. And, oh, that guy in high school by the pool who was gross, right? Oh, and then the professor in college who should have been fired. And then the creepy guy on the subway in New York City. Oh, and also the way that cashier just spoke to me, and the dude who just cut me off in traffic, and the way my partner just snapped at me. Ugh. We cover ourselves in these injuries, and then we beat ourselves up even more, or cast blame, because our lives don't look the way we hoped they would, or work the way we want them to. Yeah. There's nothing more terrifying than facing the unknown when we've trained ourselves over the course of a lifetime to expect worst-case scenarios. If I'm gonna get hurt again, at least I'll be ready for it next time. I'm gonna navigate the unknown in the most predictable way I can. But here's the thing. There's no one to blame for these limiting loops that we find ourselves in. Not us, and not anyone else. It's human nature to cover ourselves and look for these injuries. So what do we do if these conclusions that we draw we're emotionally invested in, and they become the beliefs that we hold as true, but we're not happy with the outcomes of our lives? What do we do? How do we interrupt our own spin cycles? Through the power of self-permission. Permission defines our lives, you guys, in so many ways. When we're little, we ask if we can have a snack, if we can stay up late, if we can go to a friend's house, if we can go to the bathroom, or if we can finish the math problem on the whiteboard. We ask for raises and promotions and acceptance into groups, and if our hair looks okay, and if it's okay to be honest with someone. Seeking permission is a learned practice that we all participate in, even as adults, and sometimes without even realizing it. Permission defines the parameters around our lives that teach us what is and isn't acceptable. And sometimes we forget, even when we grow up, that these parameters are malleable. I mean, how does someone like me who believed I was a target growing up and whose MO was to run and hide and avoid and not be trapped, and that made me scared of everybody and insecure and defensive and wanting to crawl under a rock. How do I get on a stage and expose myself like this? I give myself permission. Now, there are infinite ways we can all permit ourselves to break free from our spin cycles. And here are 3 ways you can try. The first is to stop getting consumed by the feelings that arise when you get triggered. And you can do this by saying, thank you for being part of who I am. Because here's the thing, there's not one feeling inside you or one belief you hold that is bigger than who you are. When you realize that you're the container for all of your feelings and all of your beliefs, you can start permitting those parts of you to exist without letting them take over. Yeah, you are in charge. You are the adult. Or for my daughters and Sophia in the audience, you're becoming the adult. And you get to decide if you're going to be led by a limiting belief or lead with an empowered one. When you take a moment to thank that part of you that is arising again out of habit, out of years of validation, you acknowledge it for what it is, a conclusion you drew at a time in your life when it made sense. Those limiting beliefs that hinder you also once helped you. Believing that I was a target made me smarter, more alert, more observant, more compassionate, and more willing to learn and get ahead of the curve. Give yourself permission to appreciate that part of yourself as one smaller piece of the whole, and let it know that the bigger part of you can take it from here. The second way you can really start to take back your power is by owning up. And you can do this by believing, if I created it, I can change it. Now, when you take ownership of the lenses through which you see the world, you become empowered. You're no longer defined by things out of your control. You can't control other people, and you can't control everything that comes your way, but you can control how you choose to interpret a situation. Okay, I can give myself permission to continue being a target. That choice will always be available. But since I am the one that drew that conclusion in the first place, it's mine to change if I wish. Instead of being a target, today, I choose to be an instrument, of change for the betterment of all. Responsibility creates choice, and choice creates power, and with power comes freedom. If I created it, I can change it. And the third way you can really start to transform your life is by saying, I'm going to do it anyway. That's my daughter. So this is a commitment you can make that has twofold results. When you do it anyway, that means that regardless of whatever you need to do to move your life forward, even if you don't feel like it, or even if it brings up feelings of inadequacy or insecurity, you do it anyway. You commit to showing up in your life. You follow that voice inside that knows what you want, honors what you need, and tells you what you need to do to move one step closer to your goals and dreams. Regardless of how I feel backstage, I walk out here and I do this talk anyway. And when you commit to doing it anyway, that means you can do it any way you want. That's my other daughter. So doing it any way means I can walk out on the stage and do this talk any way I choose. I can have props, I can have slides, I can just talk within the context of a TEDx talk. I can do it my way. Or I can choose to get this message out another way. Write a book, host a podcast, teach a course. I don't have to get on a stage if I don't want to. The parameters around your life are built by what you're taught and the conclusions you draw. But those parameters are not fixed. They are ideas that can be changed. Did I even 3 months ago think I'd be on a TEDx stage talking to all of you today? No, I did not. And here I am. You don't have to ask permission to show up in your life or for how you choose to show up. You just show up, you guys, in your way, through the power of self-permission. Thank you so much. I'm Hollis Rohrer. Thank you.